I was thinking about this the other day. There were a few times early on in recovery, and there's a small faction of you that really hates when I say early on in recovery. So I'll tell you somewhere between 5 and 12 months on in recovery. And then another maybe 24 months or so during a real difficult section of time. There were at least 3 instances where I remember driving home after a long day of work and really being exhausted, really being frustrated, and quite honestly, and this may kind of cause a few of you to be unnerved, but really not wanting to go home. I can remember being at a certain intersection here in Austin, Texas that I would go through, and I remember being in a turn lane where I could veer off and drive for a long period of time on this certain road, or I could go home. And I'll tell you, one time it was so captivating, this space of uncertainty and ambivalence, that I think I went through 2 or 3 light cycles before someone finally got behind me and laid on the horn, and it was like I was in a whole nother world. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to go home. There was no affair partner. It wasn't like I had somewhere else to go. I just didn't want to go home. And for many unfaithful spouses, as well as for many betrayed spouses, there are moments when you don't want to go home. And it was perplexing because I kind of didn't know how to frame the feelings that I was feeling, because I loved my kids and I wanted to be with them, but at a few points, I didn't want to be with Samantha. I was angry and frustrated at my lack of ability to control the situation and make her love me again, or want to be with me again, or enjoy me again. And I found myself at this intersection at least 3 times, really having to do what I did not want to do. In recovery, there's a principle that I have unwillingly embraced at times. And it's the principle that in many ways recovery is about doing what you don't want to do. I didn't want to go home on those occasions. And there's times that as an unfaithful spouse, you really don't want to go home because you're frustrated, you're angry, you're exhausted. Nothing that you're doing is working. And it's the same thing with a few nuances as a betrayed spouse. Sometimes you don't want to go home. You don't want to be with your spouse or your partner because of some unique nuances and frustrations that you're dealing with. And I just want to tell you, it's okay, because in many ways, at the height of realness, if you will, at the height of just gut level honesty, recovery is in many ways about doing what you don't want to do. I didn't want to do a lot of the sessions with Samantha and Rick. I didn't want to do a lot of the things that we were doing. I didn't want to read this book or that book. But there came a point where I had to realize that I had lived by emotion and preference for long enough, and it had cost me everything. There comes a point where you, as an unfaithful spouse particularly, and let me speak to you first, you have to be willing to do what you don't want to do in your emotion because it's the right thing. There just comes a point you have to mature. You have to man up, or you have to woman up, and realize that you have to do this. This isn't about emotion. This isn't about preference. This isn't about the flighty nature of what your emotions and feelings are leading you to do, because if you're watching this video blog, it's pretty obvious that your emotions and your feelings have gotten you into a world of trouble. So it's probably time to stop living by emotions and start living by conviction, and living by courage, and living by principle, not emotion. Now, dare I kind of venture into these waters, there's a point where the betrayed spouse has to be willing to do what they don't want to do within reason. Like, you probably don't want to go to counseling. You probably don't want to go to, an EMS weekend or things like that. But it's the right thing to do, because if you just live by your emotions, if you just live by what you're feeling, you're probably going to not want to get out of bed most days early on. and that's completely understandable. But there comes a point where you realize, I cannot live by what I feel like I want to do or feel like I don't want to do. I have to do what needs to be done to heal. And it's a very courageous moment. Yes, there were times where I was excited about meeting with Rick and doing some recovery work with Samantha. Absolutely. But there were more times that I was not wanting to do it. And there were more times I did not want to have deep conversations with Samantha. It was not indicative of my heart to restore the marriage. It was not indicative of my heart to want to be with her and preserve our family. It was indicative of how lazy I was, how ambivalent I was about life, how depressed I was, how frustrated I was, how dysfunctional I was. And it was indicative that I had a choice to make, and AA says it best, one day at a time. It was indicative of the frustration that I had to war through to understand that if I wanted my family, if I wanted Samantha back, I was going to have to become a mature adult of a man, even in my 30s, and do what I didn't feel like doing, because if you want to see recovery, there's a price to it. It's going to require sacrifice. It's going to require a willful decision to stare in the face of all of your emotions, which are saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't go home, and decide to do it anyway with a grateful heart and a commitment of your will to do it anyway. In the community of faith, they call it dying to the flesh and deciding to walk by the Spirit, because if you walk by the Spirit, you'll not carry out the desire of the flesh. For those that don't come from faith, it's about walking in discipline and commitment to your principles, not commitment to your fluctuating emotions and passions, but being committed to live by the decision to do what is right because it's the right thing to do. And whether you come from faith or whether you don't, I will tell you, I am eternally grateful that I went home on those 3 separate occasions. I remember all the time how easily led astray I can be by emotions, by the ups and downs of life and children and family. And I want to just appeal to you today, if you don't want to do your recovery work, it's okay to feel that way. It's not okay to obey that voice. There's just too much at stake. There's too much at stake for you to continue to live by emotions, to continue to live by preferences and feelings. Now is the time to grow up. Now is the time to mature. Now is the time to develop steel inside your soul and decide that you are no longer going to be the person that you were, and you're going to find the new person that you are called to be, the new measure of a man or woman that you so desperately want to become. And it's possible, but it will not come by emotion alone.